Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, the day after we have introduced, since I became Premier, the second budget on my watch. And I want to start with this acknowledgement, and it's an acknowledgement of all of you who are here today. Because this province was built by people who worked hard, by people who had big dreams, by people who were prepared to make tough choices in difficult times. And so together, all of us, not government, not just the private sector, not just communities, not just parents and families, all of us together have built this great province, one that is recognized today around the world as a safe harbor for investment, one of the few left anywhere in North America, a province with an economy that's been remarkably resilient, and one that stands apart with a AAA credit rating, of which we should be enormously proud. As British Columbians and as Canadians, we share the same values. We are all motivated by that universal desire that all humanity has to make a better life for the kids, for the people, for the generation that comes after us. Whether that's our children, our grandchildren, or our neighbors' children, the children who are in the classrooms today, if you're a teacher, the children that you look after in the hospital if you're a nurse, the children down the street. All of us are motivated by that same desire. And it's a bedrock value that Canadians share and that people from around the world, that has drawn people from around the world to come to our country so that they can build a better life for the generation of people that comes after them. But we have to make sure that those kids have the opportunities that we never had or that our parents never had. And we have to make sure that the difficult decisions that they are making never include a decision about whether or not they're going to be able to put food on the table. We don't want our children's difficult decisions to be whether or not they can make the rent or the mortgage at the end of the month. Our kids will have to make tough decisions. But let's make sure we leave them a world where those decisions aren't among them. And it's your hard work that has created a strong economy for our province. Your hard work. You have raised your families here. You've earned your living here. You've made your home here. And you have made decisions here that create jobs that have benefited tens of thousands of people all across our province. So first, let me start with this. As your Premier, on behalf of all British Columbians, let me say thank you to you for the contribution that you have made to keeping families whole and keeping communities strong in every corner of this province. Balancing a budget allows governments to create the economic conditions that will stimulate job creation. It means managing taxpayers' money with respect, the respect that taxpayers are due after working hard to earn that money. Because we cannot help families break through if we decide we are going to break the bank. Just like with you, in your family, or in your business, spending more than we save will always just put us behind. So, as Will mentioned, I grew up in Burnaby. I grew up in a middle-class family on Fort Glen Drive in the South Slope down where the old Ocala prison used to be. My dad was a public school teacher, and my mom, until all four of us got old enough, stayed home to look after us, like a very traditional mom. She did not have a driver's license. We had 4 kids, a 3-bedroom home, an old used blue Rambler station wagon, and I had 4 brothers that used to beat me up every chance my parents were out of the house. That was a life that many of you, maybe without the brothers, would have had when you were growing up as well. Entirely middle class, where families and where your parents were required to make tough, common sense decisions every single day. My parents were determined to make the right decisions for all four of us in our little house, they decided they wanted to make decisions that would leave all of us better off than they were when they were growing up. And so those decisions meant that when my dad passed away, he did something that he was determined to do. He left us without a penny of debt, with a house without a mortgage on it. My dad even prepaid his funeral expenses. And I don't think he was remarkable for his generation. I bet that almost all of you in this room had parents who were like that. Parents who would have felt shame if they left their children with debt. That taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about why parents, why we all need to make tough decisions. Because my father, in making tough decisions every day about how they were going to spend our family money, was being selfless. He was thinking about the future. He was thinking about me. And he knew that if he went with a little bit less, and sometimes said no to my brothers, my sister, and myself, he was looking after us in the long term. And that's true about governments too. Governments can be selfish, or we can be selfless. We can decide that we are going to spend all of the money today. We can decide that we will not only not put any aside, but that we'll build up mountains of debt for our kids. Or we can do the right thing for our kids. And we can do what your parents did for you and make sure that when they get their chance to make their own decisions, we leave them without a penny of debt. Because if we leave them with debt, all we do is deprive them of the right to choose their own future. So you all know that this is an election year. Many of you have mentioned that to me. But you'll also know that this is an unusual election year budget. There is not a goodie bag in sight. There's no money falling off the back of a truck in this particular election year. And that is as it should be. Because strong leadership means making tough decisions, not just buying votes with promises. Because those promises are going to saddle our children with debt. Those promises are going to mean higher taxes for us today and for our children tomorrow. Balancing the budget, as Jim and Mavis Clark would tell you, is just simply the right and responsible, the common sense thing to do. And more than that, it's what I said I would do. 2 years ago, when I became your premier, I promised you we would balance this budget. But 2 years ago, and even 1 year ago, I wasn't alone. Almost every other premier in this country said they would balance the budget. And now today there are only two, Brad Wall in Saskatchewan and us here in British Columbia. The only provinces that are balancing our budget. And in this election year, the good thing is, I'm not going to be running against perfection. I'm going to be running against the NDP. So you'll see, and I'm sure you will have noticed this if you followed the coverage yesterday, our balanced budget includes a modest and growing surplus, not just for this year, but for all 3 years of our fiscal plan. On how we get to balance, I want to tell you about the 3 principles that have guided this budget for Mike DeYoung and myself. 1, that we are all in this together, that all of us need to work together if we are going to achieve balance. 2, that it starts with me. It starts with government achieving balance. Before we ask you for a single penny, we went out and did everything we could to control spending. And I do want to say thank you to the Board of Trade. The Board of Trade, if you'll notice on their report card, gave us an A on controlling spending. I actually think we deserved an A+ on that. I'm going to be seeking a parent-teacher meeting after the luncheon today. In terms of controlling spending, you should know we're at 1.5% in terms of the growth in spending in government. We are miles ahead of any other province in this country. And people say, are you going to be able to do it? Absolutely we're going to do it, because we did it last year. And we still came in $240 million under budget. We are going to do it this year. Not just because we have a proven track record of doing it, but because we need to do it. And 3, in everything we do, we are going to protect families. We are going to strive to protect all of the services that define us as British Columbians and Canadians and that families depend on every day. Because you know this, balancing a budget means being able to provide more programs and services to British Columbians. Because it stands to reason that when you owe less money, you actually have more money to spend. That is a basic truth of budgeting, that those who say we just shouldn't balance this year, next year, the year after, just simply don't seem to understand. And it means that our children will have their own choices when it is their time to lead, rather than struggling with the legacy of decisions that we lacked the courage as a generation to make. Now, Mike DeYoung worked for months to try and find the right balance in this budget. And that meant looking within government first, as I said. We looked to find as many savings as we possibly could to reduce the deficit, and some difficult choices were necessary. I want to walk you through some elements of that. The first, and this is the good news, because we stuck to our jobs plan and we succeeded, our economy grew. And that meant more revenue for government overall. Proof that our plans are working. Second, we held the line on spending because we believe in a bigger economy and a smaller government, not the other way around. And that has also helped us reduce our deficit. The only way, I know this, and you do too, the only way to hold the line on spending is to ensure that our economy is actually growing faster than government is. We worked with public sector employees to find the savings within our existing budgets. And I want to say a special thanks to them for this, for putting the interests of British Columbians ahead of their own. Because if we had failed to reach these agreements, if the people sitting across from us at the bargaining table from the public sector unions had said, you know what, we demand and we're going to hold out for a mere 2% over the next 2 years. And if we had agreed to that, we would have added $500 million to our debt. $500 million. And it's not acceptable for our kids. And it's not leadership. It's not leadership from government, and it wouldn't be leadership from our public sector unions. They stepped up, and we owe them a debt of thanks for doing that. This is the only province in the country where public sector unions have taken zeros 4 years in a row. Probably the only province that has really tried to make sure we made that kind of gain. But the only province where our public service also agreed. And if we didn't take the steps that we'd taken, and the ones that I'm about to tell you about, we would leave $3 billion more in debt to our kids over 3 years. The steps that we outlined in our budget yesterday are the difference between $3 billion in debt for our kids and a balanced budget. Healthcare costs, as you know, are roughly half of our provincial budget, and they are continuing to rise. It is not sustainable. So we're managing that cost curve, and we're making sure that any increases in healthcare are affordable. But make no mistake, the healthcare budget is still growing by $2.4 billion. And that's to make sure that our system continues to work for the people and the aging population in particular that will continue to depend on it. We've also frozen salaries for all senior managers. We've introduced a hiring freeze across the public service, and we are very aggressively reviewing all of our crowns, and that is helping reduce our deficit as well. But we had to go further than that. So we're selling non-strategic surplus government assets, and that revenue is going straight to our bottom line. This is also going to get us closer to balance. And I know the cynics will say, well, you won't sell those assets. You bet we will. That land in Surrey that the government bought for a hospital and then decided to build the hospital somewhere else, it's sitting there, not producing a penny of economic activity, Taxpayers don't need to own it. We're going to sell it. We're going to take that money to our bottom line, and we will create hundreds of jobs, or the private sector will create hundreds of jobs when economic activity begins there afresh. But those alone were also not enough. Despite tough economic times, our economy is certainly stable and growing, and that's good. We should be proud of it. But to achieve our balanced budget targets, we also had to make some targeted tax changes. Now, you remember, we signaled in Budget 2012 that if the fiscal situation didn't improve significantly, that we would increase the general corporate tax rate by 1 percentage point. And I'm here to confirm that that will take place on April 1st, 2013. But remember, even with that modest increase, corporate taxes will still be 33% lower in British Columbia than they were in 2001. And at 11%, BC will have corporate tax rates that make us the third best province and the second best corporate tax rate you will find anywhere in this country. The budget has no change to the small business tax rate, and there is no corporate capital tax on credit unions and banks. And I just want to take a second to talk about that, because those who would champion a corporate capital tax on banks and credit unions will never talk about the huge investment, the millions of dollars in new investment from financial institutions that has flowed into our province, creating thousands of jobs in the financial sector since the corporate capital tax came off. And you know, if the corporate capital tax is good enough for credit unions, we should all ask ourselves, why isn't it good enough for you? And how long will it take before a corporate tax in British Columbia moves all across the sectors, not just the financial one? We're also asking those who earn a little more to do a little more. And I may be speaking to some of those people today in this room. Our province still has the lowest income tax rates for everyone earning under $122,000. That remains unchanged. Now, last year we introduced some tax-saving measures, ones that would help parents keep their kids in sports and the arts, ones that would help seniors make renovations to remain in their homes, and Budget 2013 has some additional measures to help ease the burden on families throughout the province. As the economy strengthens and as our fiscal situation continues to improve, we are introducing 3 new initiatives that are going to help families invest in and plan the future for their children. I've traveled a lot in the last year since the last budget. I've heard from many, many parents, including from boards of trade and chambers of commerce like this one all across the province. And one of the things you were amongst the earliest to identify as a business group is the need for better access to quality early learning and childcare support for parents. And this has been a priority for you because you recognize the economic value of making sure that our youngest citizens get the head start that they need so that when they get to kindergarten, they're absolutely ready to learn. Balanced Budget 2013 introduces a 3-year plan to create new childcare spaces, to improve the quality of that childcare, and to better coordinate childcare all across the sector. And starting in April 2015, we're introducing the BC Early Childhood Tax Benefit. This is going to provide families, all families, with a child under 6 with an annual benefit of up to $660 a year. Combined with the federal benefits, it means up to $4,728 for a couple with 2 children under the age of 6 if your family income is $90,000. It starts in the early years, then from K-12 education, and then in post-secondary education. 1 million job opportunities are going to open up in British Columbia over the next 10 years if we play our cards right and keep this economy cooking. How are we going to make sure that our kids are first in line to take advantage of all of those opportunities? We have to make sure they can access an education. So that's why we introduced the BC Training and Education Grant for every child under 7. Starting today, every child turning 6 in this province will be eligible to receive a $1,200 one-time grant from government that will be directly deposited for them into their registered education savings plan. That money will earn interest. And if a family contributes just $10 a month, by the time their child graduates from high school, they'll have enough money to do a third of a nursing program at BCIT. A third of the program will be paid for. If a family contributes $50 a month, they'll have enough money to pay their first-year tuition at UBC, a quarter of their undergraduate degree at one of the world's finest post-secondary institutions. That's the power of savings. And that's the power of a registered education savings plan. We want to make sure that in a country where we have some of the highest levels of personal debt, we encourage parents to save for their kids, and that those savings will go into the most important investment those young people can benefit from in the future. It's a core value of our budget. Education, whether it's early and whether it's later. And I believe that's also a core value of all Canadians. It's also why balancing the budget is at the core of our jobs plan. It's also why we haven't turned our backs on the discipline that has helped us build BC even through this very difficult downturn. And I want to give you a real quick example of our resilience here. Look down south at California. They have recovered less than half of the jobs that they lost during the recession. In the United States, they have recovered just over 50%. Here in British Columbia, we have recovered over 152% of the jobs that were lost in our recession. We are more than making up here in British Columbia. That's because we're forging new partnerships across the Asia-Pacific with the rapidly growing economies of the Pacific Rim, with countries like India, China, Japan, Korea, where the heartbeat of the world economy has now moved. And I want you to take a look at this graph and see what's happened in our trade relations over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we went to Asia as a government and people said, you will never succeed in rapidly expanding your trade with Asia. And we set some very specific goals. We beat them. Trade to Asia went from under 20% to over 45%. We are now in British Columbia less dependent on the American economy than any other province in Canada. It was something we set out to do, something our critics said we would never achieve, but we did it. And now we can do more. And that is why we are taking full advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we have with natural gas. We have a surplus supply here, and it's going to transform our economy, and it is going to put tens of thousands of people to work. The comparison that I often think about is Alberta. Think about how oil transformed the Alberta economy. Think about how their Heritage Fund launched 40 years ago and what it has done for their province. We have the chance to bring home an opportunity that is just as big right here in British Columbia. I believe in freeing up small business from the regulatory burden that makes it impossible to grow. I believe in smaller government, not bigger government. I believe in labor laws that are flexible enough to reflect the modern-day economy. And I believe that when government gets out of the way, the private sector will be able to do what it does best, and that's create economic growth and put people to work. And I believe in balancing our budget, not 5 years from now. I believe in balancing our budget this year, because I know that that's what our children deserve. And that's where I stand. People might disagree with that, but I want them to know. I want them to know that those are the principles that I stand on. And if people disagree with me, fair enough. But I believe that in a democratic society, the responsibility of leadership requires we be clear. The responsibility of leadership includes telling people where you stand and letting them know what your plans are, not after an election, before an election. Together, all of us, working together, we can secure the promise that British Columbia holds for another generation. We have a huge opportunity within our grasp. It's right at our fingertips. If we make the right decisions today, the right decisions this year, if we do that, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, our children will have a chance to look at us and say, Mom, Dad, thank you. You made the right decisions. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here today.